Hey everybody, welcome back to Dagish America Presents. I'm your host, Ben Harrell, and you're listening to Season 6, where we've been unpacking what leadership looks like in the fumigation industry, on the job site, in the office, and across every customer interaction. So far this season, we've talked about everything from building teams and mentoring new leaders, to managing crisis and delivering exceptional customer service. But in today's fast-moving world, there's another leadership skill we can't afford to overlook: innovation. That's right, technology is changing the way we fumigate. There's no doubt our industry is evolving fast, and the companies that succeed are the ones where leadership doesn't resist those changes, they embrace them. In this episode, we're exploring how leaders can guide their teams through technology adoption, because new tools can only improve operations if people know how to use them, and more importantly, understand why they matter. To help us walk through this important topic, I've invited Bartek Dranowski, President and CEO of Dagish America, to share how he's approached tech adoption, training, and change management in the field. So please, help me welcome Bartek to the show. Bartek, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks again for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us to talk about this very important topic. I really appreciate it.
Ben, you are most welcome, and it's always a pleasure to be a part of the podcast.
Yes, thank you. So I always start out this way. I know you've been a podcast guest before, but just in case there's anybody who has not had an opportunity to listen to any of your previous podcast episodes, if you could do me a favor and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, Ben. So I started in the fumigation industry in the summer of 1992 as a temporary laborer helping to seal up tobacco warehouses for fumigation. This was while I was attending college. Upon graduation, I was offered a position with Dagish America, and I've been here ever since. I worked in our Richmond operation, mostly working on tobacco fumigation, and then transitioning into some vessel fumigation work as well. And then served as director of operations, overseeing our service operations. Then I served as the chief operating officer, overseeing our service, production, and sales operations. And then about 3 years ago, I took over as CEO of our North American operations. And that's sort of how I ended up where I am today.
Yeah, so similar stories between you and I. Starting out bottom rung of the ladder, taping and sealing, and working all the way up into a senior management role. That's terrific. And I think the other good part about that is it gives you an opportunity to kind of see every step of what's done inside the organization.
To be honest with you, one of the things I've enjoyed is performing the different aspects of fumigation. And one of my mottos is I never ask anybody to do anything that I haven't done myself or I wouldn't do myself. When I became more involved in senior leadership, I had to immerse myself a little deeper in some of our administrative processes just to make sure I had a working knowledge and understanding of what's going on there, because operations was one thing and production and distribution and sales, but the admin processes are a little bit of a different animal.
Oh, yeah. And it's so important to learn every aspect of a business, especially from a leadership position. So, I definitely applaud you for that. So the topic that we're talking about today is, the whole season we're talking about kind of leadership in our industry. And I know one thing that, especially recently, I'd say in the last decade, maybe 15 years, we're starting to see this huge adoption of new tools, new fumigants, new technologies, new products that are being introduced into our industry. And it seems like it's ever changing. So right out of the gate, I just kind of wanted to ask you, when it comes to adopting some of those new tools or systems into our industry, what are some of the biggest hurdles that you think that our teams go through?
Sure. Well, I think the very first one is just embracing the new technology, systems, and processes. You have to approach today's world with a very open mind and a very open perspective as to what else is out there and how can we leverage this to make our organization or processes or people better than they were yesterday. Not everything works, and not everything works equally as well, and not everything fits into every organization the same way as it may into another organization. But keeping your eyes peeled and making sure that you're vigilant of what is out there and what can be used to make your processes better. Obviously, people are very often resistant to change, and that's usually where most of the friction comes in, is with adaptation of change. So in order to overcome some of that, I think some of the things necessary would be real clarity of purpose. so folks know why we are going to do what we're going to do. Training to make sure that they're very comfortable with what it is that we're going to do as far as new technology systems or processes. Make sure we review what the new workflow adaptation will look like. And oftentimes, one of the hurdles for the teams is the perception of increased workload. So anything new obviously will not be approached with the same efficiencies as something that a team member may have been doing for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So initially, it may seem like additional workload, but as they become more proficient and more expert in a process or the system or the technology, the idea is to obviously decrease workload, not increase workload. And it's also important to make sure to have leadership buy-in at all levels. If somebody doesn't believe that the processes or the improvement is actually going to help, then it's difficult to be convincing with it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I think that's a key critical point. It's really hard to teach somebody something or to have an expectation that they're going to adopt a new technology or service or system if you yourself aren't sure if you buy into it. So you kind of have buy-in from the top down. I mean, you can have buy-in from the bottom up as well, but I think having buy-in from the top down works a little bit better in a lot of cases. So, and our industry is constantly changing. I mean, I've been in this industry for about 22 years now, and I did mention that most of the change has happened kind of over the last 10 to 15 years, but it's been more like it's changing faster in the last 10 to 15 years than it was, in the previous years, at least in my career. So it just seems like everything's moving much, much faster. And I think sometimes people can feel like maybe they're getting overwhelmed with the amount of change. And not just internally from like the internal organization, but it's overwhelming when you're in the industry and you see all this change happening. Not, like I said, not just with your organization, but with other organizations as well. So how do you think leaders can introduce this new technology without trying to overwhelm or alienate their crews? Because I do think that happens sometimes too. You get on social media and you see all of this new technology, AI is coming into play, all these different adaptations, new product lines are coming into play constantly, new back end systems are coming into play, as far as like accounting and invoicing and things like that. It just always feels overwhelming if you let it feel overwhelming. So how do you tell your people not to be overwhelmed? How do you not alienate them when we're trying to introduce some of this ourselves?
Well, Ben, you hit it at the bullseye right at the end of our last question which is buy-in. You have to have buy-in from the entire team. And from a leadership perspective, you also have to approach this with a certain level of empathy. Because perhaps it's not just our industry that's changing. The world around us is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. Just looking at vehicles, for example, what the vehicle of 2025 looks like versus 10, 15, 20 years ago. So perhaps the one constant or the one sort of normal thing that the employee experiences is the workflow. And all of a sudden that's being disrupted as well. So to recognize that there may be some resistance to change, but it's key to explain as to why this change is important to the organization. And that's the key to the buy-in. You have to start with the why this is going to be better, why this is going to improve us, why this is going to make us more competitive, why this is going to make us safer, why this is going to increase our efficiencies, things like that. And oftentimes leading by example, but I don't necessarily mean just by example as doing what needs to be done, but showcase an example. So if there's a small pilot program that could be done within the organization and then cite the success of that program to the rest of the team so they see that, hey, when the rubber meets the road, this really does work. This isn't just change for the sake of change. And that's one of the things that we have to be very careful of is change for the sake of improvement, not just changing because there are different ways of doing things. So to really assess to make sure that what we're going to change is going to be an improvement versus just doing things differently. By the end of the day, it really doesn't provide any positive result for the organization. And truly leading by example, in this case, I mean literally leading by example. So at leadership levels, if we're not adaptable to change and we don't embrace change and we don't approach things from a different perspective, it's very difficult to be convincing that that is the right approach for the organization and all team members as a whole.
Yeah, and you really brought up a couple of really, really good points in what you were just saying. And a couple of them that I keyed in on right away was saying don't change just for the sake of change. It's so easy for us to look at that shiny new technology that's out there and just make the assumption, oh, that looks great. I definitely think that we need to adopt that into our organization when it may not be necessary. You mentioned earlier, not every new thing is going to make sense for every single organization. So you can't just latch on to the next shiny thing with the expectation that it's going to work for your organization. You really have to do your research. You really have to do the market research. You have to do the economical research. Is it economically viable for your company? Does it make sense to spend the money on that change? Is it going to improve your efficiency, your safety, and so on and so forth? And the idea of pilot programs, I think, is so critical as well. And I think a lot of companies do pilot programs. I think that's a great way to try to introduce change, or at least kind of test it a little bit. But you also have to have people who are willing to do the trials, of course. So like you were saying earlier, changing people's mindsets, I think, can be pretty difficult too, even in a pilot program. Because if they don't have buy-in and they're not open-minded going into a pilot program, it's doomed to fail because you don't have that buy-in. So I think it's really important to make sure that when you're doing these pilots that you're choosing the right people and that they're using the right approach.
You're exactly right, Ben. And, with all due respect, these new systems and technologies have some very talented salespeople.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to differentiate between what's a really persuasive sales pitch versus this is really what our organization needs. Because there are a lot of cool things out there. I'm not denying it, but they do often come at a cost, whether it's a true cost or opportunity cost or a combination of the two. And the assessment of whether or not this is truly what our organization needs is where it all begins, because not all solutions are whatever your organization needs.
Yeah, you're keying into it. And again, it's so easy for us to look at the shiny new penny that's out there and think, oh man, this is going to be perfect for our organization. And I think another tool that we could use that I've used in the past that I think is valuable is speaking to some people in your organization and asking them, hey, do a little bit of research on this. Do you think that this could be beneficial to your department, to your team? What are the pros and cons? And just really having that open-ended conversation. And a lot of times you'll get feedback that will help you make the decision on whether or not that new technology, that new service, that new product line is going to be beneficial for you. There's many times that I myself have looked at new technology and thought, wow, this is really going to be a huge benefit to me and our team. And then when I talk to the team about it and they say, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Then upon further reflection, I look back and I'm like, oh, well, maybe this isn't the right thing for us. Maybe there are other avenues that we could pursue if we're wanting to increase efficiency or increase profitability or whatever the case is, or maybe it's something that doesn't need to change. I mean, there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline that are innovative, that are good for change, but there are some things that if I'm just being completely honest, I think shouldn't change. Things like customer service. I mean, now, how you achieve customer service may change as technology advances, of course, but I know all of us have picked up the phone to call a customer service department and gotten that circular phone call, that robotic circular phone call, and we've all felt that frustration. And yeah, that technology exists and it may make things more efficient for the company that provides that service, that circular robotic phone call service, but it sure is frustrating when you're just trying to figure out how to get something to function and you're on that endless phone call and you can't actually talk to a real person. So some things, even though they may be beneficial to you on one end, whether it's efficiency, whatever the case is, may be detrimental to you on the other end, especially when you're in a customer-facing business like what we have.
Well, of course. And it's always really, really critical to make sure that you know what your customers need. What you think your customers need, what your customers really need and appreciate may often be different. And different customers may have different needs and appreciate different aspects of what you're performing. To some, yes, being able to contact us or contact one of our technicians or one of our admin folks directly may be the most important thing. For others, there may be a different priority. But nonetheless, it's really critical, especially as new technologies emerge almost on a daily basis, to not only stay informed and keep our eyes open, but also allow other employees to participate in the process. There may be something very specific to a defined role that I or somebody else in our leadership team never would have come across, but the employee recognized something that they have seen or they have heard of a peer in their industry doing that may really improve a process like accounting, shipping, receiving, any of those other sort of related fields. So it's really important to make sure that we keep an eye out and keep an ear out.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We not only have to listen to the people who are selling the emerging technology, but we also have to listen to our own people because that's where we're going to get some of the best news, because our people understand our operations, they understand our functions, and if they're bringing something to us that they think may improve their job or make their job more efficient or make their job more cost effective, absolutely, we have to listen to them and consider those ideas. You're absolutely right.
Right. They may be the ones that are the best equipped to quickly recognize process gaps or pain points in the current process. So if there's a solution, then we should definitely keep an eye out and be open to those types of suggestions.
Yeah. So we know the technology is changing. We know there's new products coming down the line. We know that there are all kinds of innovations happening. We also know that human beings statistically are very resistant to change. It's just in our DNA. We're habitual creatures. It's really difficult for us to want to change, all of us. So how do you help a more traditional or like a skeptical team member? How do you help them embrace change? How do you get them to change that mindset?
Great point, Ben. So this is always a big challenge. So first and foremost, you have to recognize which team members are the most resistant to the specific change, because some team members may respond differently to change in how our products are organized, for example. Some team members may respond differently to how electronics and technology play a role in our daily operations. So you have to recognize which team members are going to be the most resistant to that kind of change, and they may require a different approach. So certain team members for certain programs may require a more refined approach to make sure that you have buy-in from them as well. Oftentimes, it's best to start small, so that way you can build up confidence and you can show success stories and you can show how this is already working. If you have the opportunity to bring in someone who's already tried that technology, or at least have a testimonial from them to show how well this is working, that may help as well. Education, explanation, obviously, to make sure that folks know, again, back to the why. Why are we doing this? And how is this going to help you? And how is this going to help the organization? And I sort of hit on this earlier, but the peer validation component of it. If somebody's already doing it and they can speak to the benefits of it, it resonates really well with someone to hear that it's not just management or a department that's pushing something through. It's really working well and it is being well received, and showing the benefits of it is obviously critical. So highlighting the good parts of it and highlighting how this will improve the overall employee experience is really critical.
Again, you hit on really good points there. I think that two things that you can utilize to help people embrace the change are, like you said, first and foremost is education, making sure that they understand why the change is taking place, what it is that we're changing to, and how it's going to benefit them. And that's the easiest way to get buy-in from people who may be a little bit more skeptical, is showing them how it's going to benefit them directly. I think that really works very well. And then also just open-ended communication, asking them questions. Why are you resistant to this? What do you think it is about this new technology or this new product line that's going to maybe not be successful or make your job more difficult? And ask those questions. That way you can explain, again, why you think it may be the opposite, why it may be beneficial. But to be honest with you, again, not that I'm resistant to change, but sometimes when you ask those questions, the answers that you get may change your mind on it a little bit. Say, you know what, well, maybe this technology, maybe this innovation isn't right for us. Maybe we shouldn't be pursuing this if it's going to add this additional expense or this additional safety concern, whatever the case is with these employees. So I think the open-ended conversation of it is really very, very critical to getting people on board or further investigating on whether or not this innovation is really going to be ultimately valuable.
I totally agree, Ben. So it's definitely a two-way street with feedback from all stakeholders. You have to be able to communicate and get feedback back as the systems and process are being implemented. Now, there's a very fine line of receiving feedback, processing feedback, and getting to an analysis paralysis stage where things just don't move forward because you're constantly, a lot of people have a lot of great ideas, but at the end of the day, you need to sort of focus on what is mission critical and what are the other features that are sort of what I call wouldn't it be cool if, and what is the priority and what needs to be done first. And it's often really important to also explain how this particular system or process is going to fit into the bigger picture. Not everybody is aware of other departmental needs and other things that are happening where this was going to be an improvement for the organization as a whole. And perhaps the next step is going to be something that affects this person individually and is going to make their life much easier at work as well. So explaining sort of what this technology is going to do and how it fits into the bigger picture, I think is really, really important. And empowering process champions. So if you have someone who truly believes it and knows it already, let them speak and let them convince others as well through, the proofs in the pudding. So if it's really a good system and a really good process and it's really a valuable improvement, let someone who is very familiar with it be the voice of it. And obviously tracking progress and celebrating any kind of small win. And that way you continue the positive reinforcement to make sure that folks are recognized for adapting to change and implementing some sort of a change and showing the benefits of it. And they can then in turn become your process champions.
I love the term analysis paralysis. That's the first time I've ever heard you say that. That's a great term. I love it. I've seen that many times in my career. People kind of fall in love with the idea of change and analysis and figuring things out, and then you hit this neutral point where all you keep doing is talking and talking and talking. And then at some point you have to shift into some gear to start moving forward out of the talking phase and into the doing phase. So I love that term, analysis paralysis. That's great. We don't just have to worry about convincing our employees on why change is necessary. We also have to look at what some of the industry itself is doing, innovation, new product lines, new technologies. In order to stay competitive in our market, if our industry is ever changing, in order for us to stay competitive, we also have to be ever changing. So in your opinion, what role does innovation play in staying competitive? And now, not just competitive, but actually compliant as well, because regulatory requirements are ever changing as well, especially as technology increases and as new product lines come on. All of these regulatory requirements change, and so compliance changes as well. Safety compliance, regulatory compliance, all of that stuff, it all changes. So how do we play in that sandbox, so to speak? How do we stay relevant with all of those ever-changing things that occur in our industry?
Great point, Ben. So my initial answer is very short and to the point. It's a must. It's not optional. It is a must. And next one I'm going to say is something you have heard me say before, and that is if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind.
Yes.
Because the world around us is moving forward. Our competitors are moving forward. The markets are moving forward. Technology is moving forward. Compliance requirements are moving forward. And if you're not at the leading edge, that means you're falling behind. And it is then very difficult to play catch up. And you're just sort of looking over everybody else's shoulder versus being a leader. And we at the Dagish Group and Dagish America and Dagish Canada, we pride ourselves on being industry leaders. So it is not just our corporate mantra, but it is also part of our culture is that we look for ways to being leaders and we look for ways of defining what the industry standard will be in the future as we move forward.
And speaking of that, you were talking about looking forward and moving forward. You have an analogy that I've heard you say several times, and I don't want to steal your thunder. I want to give you the option to say it yourself, but I've heard you say it in several meetings talking about driving down the road and looking through the rearview mirror, that analogy. I think that pertains exactly to this topic that we're talking about. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of explain that because I absolutely love it, and I think other people will too.
For sure. So just sort of set the stage. It's a very simple photograph taken from inside of a vehicle, looking through the windshield as the vehicle is driving through probably the landscape of something in the Midwest of the U.S. So you have a fairly large perspective ahead of you, and a small percentage of that perspective is taken up by the rearview mirror. And for me, it sort of symbolizes the need to look forward and how much percentage of your vision needs to be dedicated to looking forward. But you also periodically need to look back to learn from lessons that worked well, things that didn't work well. Part of being an innovator is accepting a level of risk. Not everything works and not everything is going to work out the way you were hoping it would. But as leaders, it is our charge to analyze this risk and see which road we should take, as well, whether we should go left or right or stay straight. So going back to the picture, Ben, it's something I point out, that the necessity to look ahead. Again, the picture is taken on a day with bright blue skies and the visibility is probably 10 to 15 miles. But that's not how our world works every day. There are days when it's cloudy. There are days when it's foggy. There are days when it's raining. And using the same analogy, sometimes our perspective may only be a mile or a quarter mile. So knowing that the weather may be different at different times, we need to adapt to make sure that we stay in control, because on a cloudy day or a foggy day, you really need to look a little closer and take advantage of days when it's clear and look as far ahead as possible. But one of the things you should never do, and it's whether you're driving a business or driving a car, is look at the very tip of the hood and keep that as your peripheral vision, because you have to look ahead. So that's really a critical component of staying competitive and staying compliant and adapting to change and innovation.
Yeah, I love that analogy because of course, it's always critical that you always look into your past, because history is full of the lessons, as you stated, but you don't want to spend too much of your time looking at your past. And the other thing I love about that analogy as well is in a car, you're always moving forward. You know, if you're on a road and you're driving a business, just much like driving a car, you should always be moving forward. You should never be in neutral. And that's why change is so important, because as you're moving forward, the landscape changes, your perspective changes, your gas changes, you know, having to fill up the gas. Everything about driving a car forward is about constant change. And when you're driving a business, it's the exact same thing. You're going to have constant change coming at you, and you have to be able to navigate that. So I absolutely love that analogy. It's the reason why I wanted you to bring it up, because I really like that one. All right, so I only have one question left for you, Bartek, and I think we've already kind of covered this a little bit, but I wanted to pinpoint it a little bit more. What advice would you give to a leader who's preparing their team to adopt something new?
So first and foremost, you have to sort of embrace the growth mindset. So that's what we talked about earlier. If you yourself are resistant to change, then it's going to resonate with the rest of the team, and they're going to pick up on that. And again, filtering through what really is going to work and it's not going to work for the organization in your best opinion, listening to feedback from the team at large and your leadership team as well. But once you get into bringing change on, plan, because you have to make sure you have a good plan in place, because a lot of these technologies are overlapping. There may be some redundancy in technology. So make sure that you're looking at the big picture of which way the organization is heading and what is really critical. And then after that, the next three big things are communicate, and communicate.
Right, yeah.
Everybody has to know what's going on to the best of your abilities, why it's happening. You know, going back to the why, you have to be clear with what you're doing. You have to sort of outline the goal of what this is going to accomplish. So the focus isn't necessarily just on the process, but on the result of the process, because that's really important to see the benefit of what this effort is going to generate. Most change is going to require stepping out of comfort zones, doing additional tasks, perhaps being involved in two different simultaneous processes, as one is being sunset and the other one is being brought online. So recognizing the team's additional efforts for some of this is also really important to make sure that you acknowledge the fact that there may be some additional angst as part of the growth process, but making sure that the goals are clear and the benefits are clearly stated so that everybody involved sees what the end game is and what the benefit is going to be when you finally get through the full implementation.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's great. I agree with you 100%. Especially with, like we mentioned several times earlier, the open communication, listening, making sure that you are giving clear direction, that they understand why we're changing, that you're making it very clear that if they are doing dual purpose, like you said, as we're sunsetting one method and then bringing another method on board, that's a temporary thing, that once the new system has been adopted, that things will go maybe not back to normal or what they used to be, but things will become easier. And hopefully, if the innovation is correct, even easier than it was prior to the beginning of the innovation. So I think.
Well, that's exactly right. Then this goes back to the change for the sake of change. You should be very cautious not to change just because things can be done differently, but really identify the benefit of the change.
Yeah, change for the sake of change can be a recipe for disaster. Like I was saying earlier, you don't want to grab onto that new bright, shiny thing just because it looks like it's interesting. It has to make sense for the company. It has to make sense for the organization. And it has to make fiscal sense. It has to make sense from a safety perspective. And you have to be able to justify it. We all have somebody that we're accountable toward. So we have to make sure that any change that we're adopting makes sense, not just to the people who are going to be implementing the change, but the people that we answer to as well. All right. Awesome. Well, Bartek, thanks again for a great discussion here. As always, I learn a lot, so I really appreciate it. And thanks.
Ben, you are most welcome. It's an honor to be part of another Degish America Presents. And good luck with the rest of the podcast season.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks again to Bartek for another great discussion. As we've heard today, innovation doesn't mean replacing people. It means empowering them with better tools, more data, and new ways to succeed. But that only works when leadership is willing to invest in learning, training, and guiding the change. On our next and final episode of Season 6, we'll be covering a topic not often discussed: the challenges that women face as leaders in our industry. Until then, if you have a question or topic for us, please reach out to us at podcast@degishamerica.com, or you can connect with us on your favorite social media platform. I'm Ben Harrell. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe.